Okay, thank you for your patience. We're going to call the meeting to order. This is the, are we not ready? Okay, counting down. Okay, 10, 9, 8.
We're trying to have a record short meeting, right?
Yeah, good luck. Are we good? Okay. This is the May 1st, 2019 meeting of the Planning Commission. And could we have the Pledge of Allegiance? Jason, could you lead us in that? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Roll call.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Fresco.
Here.
Vice Chair Lambert.
Here.
Commissioner Landris.
Here.
Commissioner McKinnon. Commissioner Perry. Sheriff Fonda Bernardo.
Here. Okay. Planning Director's report.
Good evening, Commission. So coming up at the next Commission meeting on May 15th, early start time at 6 p.m. We have the Virginia townhouse project that the Commission has seen a few times. We also have the Pico Boulevard use classifications, red line recommendations, and then also a alcohol CUP at 2827 Pico Boulevard. May 22nd, which is a special meeting, Wilshire Boulevard Safety Study, 1315 Lincoln, which is a CUP for a bank, 156 Fraser Avenue is a variance, and then a new housing model ordinance ROI, so bringing the Commission of ROI for some housing types that we're considering. Upcoming at City Council, May 14th, we have the SRO housing ordinance that the Commission is reviewing tonight. We also have the landmark tree appeal on California Avenue. And then upcoming community meetings, Pico Wellbeing Project community meeting. Next workshop is walking tour on May 4th at 10 a.m. And then for the R1 standards update, we have a community open house. Each meeting is the same information, so you only need to attend one. But they're Saturday, May 18th, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., Tuesday, May 21st, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and then Tuesday, also May 21st, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And that concludes my report.
Okay, any questions for the director?
Just a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
One is the DA compliance report you said is coming to council on May 29th?
Yes.
Okay.
28th.
28th, okay. And as we discussed, I just want to convey on behalf of my former colleagues on social services that they had done some work asking about DA compliance issues beyond AVR and TDM, looking at community space usage, child care supports, other elements, and I hope that there'll be some opportunity for council to offer direction on that side of the compliance report.
We'll definitely raise that issue with.
Great, thank you. And then last night there was a budget study session.
Yes.
So two questions. The first is there anything you'd like to share? And the second is, would it be helpful, given that other commissions are doing this, for this commission, perhaps on May 15th or the 22nd, to prepare and send our thoughts on PCD's budget?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. So the next step would be that the budget discussion would go back to City Council on June 5th. And that actually raises another issue I wanted to discuss with the Commission, because the Council was planning to have 2 nights of study session, June 4th and 5th. And so that would have obviously impacted the Commission's meeting on June 5th. It looks like now likely the Council's discussion will just be on June 5th. So what we wanted to talk to the Commission about is possibly moving your meeting to June 4th. So we would flip it, and the Commission would meet on Tuesday that week, and Council would meet on Wednesday that week for the budget discussion.
So let's just take a straw poll. Looking at your calendars, June 4th, does it work?
Yeah.
The calendar in your head.
What?
No, I said
Nina?
the calendar in your head.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a maybe. And we could have Kyle call and confirm later in the week. or something.
Two maybes, maybe three yeses and one unknown.
Okay.
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 I'll just be back from Kansas, so I may be wearing red shoes. But
That'd be great.
Okay.
Is that where it starts?
Right. Leslie, the
Um,
questions?
I just want to say thank you, Commissioner Landis, for bringing us up to date and doing ahead of time thinking about the budget letter. We always write a budget letter, but it's usually at midnight the week before the council meets. So it's good to have some lead time. And for any of you who want to submit ideas, for those of you who listen to the budget or want to read the staff report, Mario and me will put the letter together and we can discuss it at the meeting. I also want to say something that's not a question, but you can answer it if you want or say thank you. I want to acknowledge staff. I mean, I know that you folks have had an extraordinarily unpredictable workload in the past few months, and that doesn't even begin to correlate with your work program for this budget year. And I know how hard you have worked, and these are unanticipated things that have been handed to you by City Council, and you've really done an amazing job getting that done. And there may be some slippage elsewhere, but that's just the price you pay. So thank you.
So I have a question. Did I understand correctly that we've managed to line up money for a preservation officer? That was one of our goals as a planning commission.
Yeah. So.
He gave you the shot.
So yeah, so that was brought up at the budget study session last night, and the approach is we are taking an existing position within the planning division and converting that to a preservation planner. That's
Yeah. Okay, good. Well,
I would just like to register my glee.
okay. Moving on to statements of official action. The first one is the Trader Joe's Alcohol, 2300 Wilshire, 7A. It should be on. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so it's on. So I would entertain a motion if there's no discussion.
I would move that we adopt the statement of official action.
Okay.
Should we move the consent calendar for both?
Well,
Well, we do
have,
this as a, whatever they are, first, the STOAs.
Yeah, these are STOAs.
These are STOAs, they're not,
also 7A and B. Can we move them together? Yes.
Okay.
whatever.
Any questions?
Okay, then I move both.
Okay. A second?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay. No, hearing no discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We're going to do roll call.
We need roll call?
Please.
Okay.
Okay, for statements of official action, 7A and 7B, Commissioner Anderson,
I'm going to abstain.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert.
Yes.
Commissioner Landris.
Yes.
Commissioner Perry. Chair Fondo Bernardi.
Yes.
I would also like to make a motion at this point to put items 8A, 8B, 8C, 8D, 8E, 8F, and 10B on the consent calendar.
So we're just adding 10B.
What?
8A through F are on the consent calendar.
They're already on the
Oh,
consent.
But
sorry,
I will
then we'll add
second your
10B.
motion
Okay.
to add 10B to the consent
Okay,
calendar.
great.
Okay.
Duh.
Okay. Hearing no objections? So,
May I move approval of the consent calendar?
Yes.
yes.
Second.
Second.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, but we do have one motion to speak from Neil Brower regarding 8A and 8 through 8F. So maybe he could address us.
There we go. Neil Brower of Jeffrey Mangels, Butler and Mitchell, representing WS Communities, the owner and applicant for the maps for items 8A through 8F. It remains our position, as described in our letter to you of today's date and in our prior correspondence, that the maps were deemed complete, and therefore vested as a matter of law on March 7th, 2019. The city's municipal code provides for a deemed approval for the commission's failure to act on a complete application within 50 days. 50 days from March 7th is April 27th. And therefore, it is also our position this evening that the Planning Commission is without the authority to act on those applications and that the city clerk is bound by the municipal code to deem those projects approved, subject to any appeal to the city council. There's no real dispute here that the maps themselves and the projects comply with all of the objective zoning criteria. In fact, the original March 26th IZO staff report concedes as much, and therefore the failure to recognize the compliance of the projects with those criteria and to apply those criteria to the projects is a violation of the Housing Accountability Act, because housing.
Yeah. Yeah. We're on the consent calendar for those 6 items. Those items.
And it has been proposed that 8A, 8B, C, the maps be put on the consent.
Yeah. They're on the consent.
I'm going to go ahead and take them all.
Okay. Well, those are our rules. If one person wants to.
I'm sorry. So you're saying that the idea is that we're receiving public input right now, but we're not receiving a staff report?
Well, we're going to question the staff, obviously, about this. So.
I don't think there's any need for that.
So either I think Commissioner Perry's point is it's either on the consent calendar or it's not on the consent calendar, right? If we're receiving public input, then we should pull it off.
You're not obligated to pull it and receive a staff report simply by virtue of receiving public comment. You may receive public comment, he may finish his public comment, and then you may decide whether or not you would want a staff report, or you may simply move the consent calendar.
Okay,
That's
great.
up to the commission's pleasure.
Thank you.
Does that make
Okay.
sense? Jason? Okay.
With that cleared up, and with with that, because the Housing Accountability Act applies, it would be unlawful of the city and violative of that act to deny these projects without making a finding of an immediate and otherwise unmitigable effect to health and safety and welfare. And the state's legislature has declared that those findings in projects like this should be rare, and we don't believe they can be made here. Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm completely confused.
Okay.
So we were about to just approve these. Is that what you're asking us to do, to approve these? Or
No,
to-
you were about to deny them.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Any questions?
Call for the question.
Well, can I just understand, we have a claim that these things were deemed complete in March, and our notes say they were deemed complete in April 3rd. Can you just clarify that distinction, just for our record?
So the applications were received by the City Planning Division on March 7th and determined complete by the City Planning Division on April 3rd. And that is consistent with the city's ordinance.
Okay.
Okay. Let's call the question.
But I'm going to hear Roxanne's comments if she has any.
In this particular instance, staff is available for questions. We understand there may be. If they are, our staff recommendations outlined in the reports pursuant to the finding that's presented before you in each of the reports. If you have questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah. So you feel confident that those plans were not deemed complete till April 3rd? That's just what I want to know.
That is correct.
Okay.
Can I guess I'm just curious about kind of what happens from here.
Okay, well, we take a vote, and the vote, if it is positive, it's endorsing the staff report to deny the filing of these tentative track maps.
Yeah, I guess I'm just asking about
The question is which,
beyond that.
the question is which
With regard
SRO
to-
code section applies to these projects. That's
I
the
see.
question.
Okay.
Okay. So, does anyone want to move the question?
Clarification, yeah.
You did.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
moved
anyone
by
second
Commissioner-
it?
Commissioner Anderson moved it and Commissioner Lambert seconded it, I believe.
Okay.
And just to clarify, we are moving the staff, I just want to be clear, we're moving the staff reports which recommend denying 8A through 8F, and the staff report for 10B which recommends approving the loading zone variance. That's what the consent calendar currently
Yes.
is.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just restating it. For,
Okay. So, I'd like to call the question. All those in-
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert,
Yes.
Commissioner Landris,
Yes.
Commissioner Perry, Chair Fonda Bernardi.
Yes. Okay. So we are now to item 9A, which is 534 21st Place, and the second one will be heard immediately after. First of all, are there any ex parte communications? Yes, 21st Place.
I visited the site on Monday at about 3 o'clock.
Okay. Jason? Your light's not.
So I visited the site today at 4 o'clock for about 5 minutes.
Commissioner Perry.
Okay. I also visited the site about 2 weeks ago. And could we hear the staff report?
May I ask a question
Please.
first? This item, 9A and 9B, are seem to me to be inextricably bound, if not, even though they're not legally bound. Is there a way we can somehow combine this discussion?
We can combine the discussion, but I believe we have to take separate votes because they have separate numbers. So,
Correct.
Okay.
Do you need a motion to hear them together? I move that we hear 9A and 9B together.
okay. Okay. Could we take a vote here on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So, Ivan, maybe you can make your presentation and then go right into the next one. If you're are you handling both of them?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So just go through a presentation, one presentation.
Yeah.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Ivan Lai, and I am an assistant planner in the City Planning Division. I'm here tonight to present two appeals for a fence wall hedge height modification that was denied by the zoning administrator for the properties at 630 and 634 21st Place. The properties are located on the northwest corner of 21st Street and Alta Avenue. They are they're zoned R1 in the single unit residential district. Both properties are 634 and 630 21st Place. The 634 21st Place is also known as 2121 Alta Avenue, and it has a lot size of 8,956 square feet. The property at 630 21st Place has a lot size of 8,954 square feet. From the bird's eye view, you can see the current property as is. At 634 21st Place, there is currently a two-story single-family residence with a detached garage. The residence also facing Alta Avenue, and then behind it is 630 21st Place. It's currently a vacant lot, and it's used as yard space for 634 21st Place. The lot, there used to be, at 630 21st Place, there used to be a one-story single-family house with a detached garage, and the house and the garage were demolished in June 10th of 2016. And both these lots, 634 and 630, are owned by the same owner. but they are separate lots. As part of the ZA, when it went before the zoning administrator for review, the appellant's request was at 634 21st Place was to increase the registered non-conforming 7-foot 6-inch high hedge to 10 feet in height along the south property line, and then also to increase the registered non-conforming 6-foot high hedge to 9 feet high in height along the front property line. As you can see from the slide, what I'm referring to is this property at 634, the corner property here. And then for 630 21st Place, the request was to allow for a 10-foot high hedge within the front yard setback along the front and side property lines. At the time of the end of the ZA meeting, the ZA determined on November 12th of 2018 that the zoning administrator, reviewed the above request and denied the modification. The ZA found that the hedges were not compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. The request would have a negative impact on the integrity and character of the neighborhood. And finally, the surrounding land use and security concerns did not warrant the additional height request. And also to add, this is a de novo hearing at the Planning Commission's may consider all the aspects of the application as well as the matters raised in the appeal. As part of the appeal by the appellant, it was identified as 3 main points. One was safety and security concerns. At the time, the appellant stated that the reason for modifying the request is to deter homeless and criminals from trespassing onto the property. However, the appellant at the time did not demonstrate how the additional height would create an additional deterrence, as well as provide any information that substantiating such a claim of security or trespassing issues. Additionally, the increased height proposal by the appellant is not within character of the neighborhood along 21st Place, since more than a majority of the properties have either open front yard or a permitted 42-inch high fence wall or hedge. Second main point of the appeal by the appellant was the definition of front parcel line. The appellant contends that since 634, the property at 634, the house is facing Alta Avenue, that should be considered the front parcel line. However, our zoning code states that the 21st Place is considered the front of is considered the front parcel line. And then in regards to the third point of appeal by the appellant was neighborhood support. And through that, the appellant has provided 33 signatures from surrounding neighbors who are in support of the appellant's request. The appellant's argument is that overwhelmingly neighborhood support is present. So, however, the neighborhood support is not considered in the required findings. As we see the site plan for the 634 of 21st Place, as you can see, there's a 2-story single-family residence with a 2 detached garage that's facing Alta Avenue, and this 21st Place here. And the hedges currently are 10 feet in height. The next slides show exactly the pictures in terms of how they look currently, in terms of the hedges along the side yard, as well as along the front yard along 21st Place. The next view just shows the overall view of the corner property at 634 21st Place, which I said is also known as 2121 Alta Avenue. Next slides show the property at 630 21st Place. The site plan shows the existing vacant lot along with the the hedges along the side parcel line and as well as the front parcel line. And next slide show the pictures of the hedges currently on the property. And this is the view from along 21st Place. If we looked at it in context to the combined properties, even though they are separate lots, So in plan view, the continuous hedge, as requested by the appellant, it would create an appearance of a consolidated parcel rather than two separate parcels, which can be is a concern. A consolidated appearance would also be disruptive to the overall scale of the parcel and character of the existing development pattern in the immediate neighborhood. That is. From the slide, in terms of the contextual map of the area within the subject property, which is indicated with the red stars, within a one-block area, you can see in terms of the various, it basically indicates the registered fences, walls, and hedges. So to look at it with respect to so in general, the range of the front yard hedge height ranges between 3.5 feet to 9 feet, and then the side yard, the hedge heights range from 7 feet to 10 feet. And as you can see from the west side of the property, there's indication that within the 20 properties that about 20% have legally registered and modified fences, walls, or hedges that are located within the front setback or along the side within the front setback. That's on the east side. On the west side of 21st Place, and then along the east side of 21st Place, there's a total of 22 properties, and about 25% of them are legally have legally registered or modified fences, walls, or hedges that are located within the front yard and along the side yard within the front yard setback area. Next slides basically show the properties along the west side of 21st Place, and showing the hedge heights, in particular the ones that are registered. And then along the property lines along the east side of 21st Place, these are the ones that are indicated as hedges that have been registered with the city as well. So as such, the zoning administrator was unable to make the key findings and denied the request for both properties. The key findings are as follows. They are compatible with other similar structures in the neighborhood and is required to mitigate impacts. Second finding has to do with not being detrimental or injurious to the property or improvements. And then the third finding has to do with will not impair the integrity and character of the neighborhood. Public notices mailed to property owners and tenants within a 750-foot radius. It was also published in the Santa Monica Daily Press. Staff received 5 letters in support of the appeal request. One of those letters came from the Santa Monica Protective Association some time ago, prior to this meeting, in support of the request. And then we also had one letter in opposition of the appeal request from NOMA. In conclusion, staff recommends the Planning Commission deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the zoning administrator's denial of the fence wall and hedge modification.
Okay, any questions?
I just have one question. The vacant parcel, which I guess is what, 830?
I'm sorry?
The vacant parcel, 830 21st Street.
630.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The vacant lot?
Yeah.
Okay.
It had a hedge, and now it doesn't, but the hedge that was there was approved. It was basically registered with the city, correct?
Yeah, it was registered with the city. That the building basically was, like I was saying before, was demolished. Both the garage and the one-story house, and all the hedges and the walls that were on the property were also demolished as part of that demolition.
So my question is whether that entitlement to that hedge, there's a certain period of time where they still have it or not. Is it like a 5 years period where they can replace a registered? No, there's no such thing. Okay.
Well, actually, there is, and I believe they're within the parameters of that 5 year.
It's a 5 years?
I believe it's 5 years, yes.
What?
I'm sorry. It has to be replaced in kind within that 5 years.
That's what I understand. So with the registered height they had before is still valid if they do it
That's
within
correct.
5 years. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Can we hear from the applicant? And let me make a note, if anyone wants to speak publicly on this item or any other items, can you take a chit and pull out the item number and give it to the secretary there?
So my name is Felipe Silva, and this is Mrs. Hagerman. And we have a couple of pictures showing the property, just showing how keeping the hedges at a low height, it keeps her from having privacy into her house. These hedges are the ones on the empty lot where a neighbor, one time I witnessed a neighbor just putting her hand up in the air and taking pictures. What was she taking pictures of? We don't know, but that's one of the main concerns that she has is her privacy. The support that she gets from all the neighbors is because how well she maintains her property. You know, she likes to keep the hedges cut and trim at all times. They don't interfere with the sidewalk. They don't go past, you know, the certain height. One of the, this is a picture of her husband's office looking out with the hedges blocking the, you know, the view from people that are walking on the sidewalk. And this is one of the pictures from her living room that people would be able to see into. And then in this poster, it shows basically the office where all the windows and doors are, and this is her living room. So at nighttime with the lights on, anybody will be able to see into the house with hedges that are low. And one of the things that's you know, that it's again the property on the corner, it's at a sidewalk level, and when you go west on 21st Place, it picks up a slope. So if we were to trim the hedges down, the hedges would have to have a kind of like a weird slope in order to keep them at that height. So on the west side of the property, they would be like at, let's say, 24 inches. And at the corner of the property of Alta and 21st Place, they would be at the register height. So that's, you know, she just basically wants to keep the hedges at a certain height for her privacy, and also with the concerns of other neighbors that are directly across, you know, the security of people trying to come into the empty lot, hopping over that empty lot, and creating also security purpose to the houses around them. Any questions?
Any questions?
Do you realize that you could, without even coming here, build that same hedge 15 feet back from the front yard setback and still have your privacy and not have the other impacts that the staff report states? Are you aware of that?
Not really.
Well, you can.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, in terms of the 630 21st Place, the front yard setback for that vacant lot is actually 30 feet, the front yard setback, not 15, yeah.
Okay. Sean?
So I'm reading your appeal, and one of the statements that you make, I'm looking at pages 26 and 28 of the staff reports. I believe that I'm seeing, we live in Seattle most of the year, so we can't monitor who would enter the property. We may visit for short periods of time. Can you say more about that?
That's correct. Felipe is my property manager, and he takes care of the property. So when we just come down occasionally, you know, we have no way of really keeping track of who's coming and going, or who's looking over, or who's lurking about.
Okay, and so forgive me, I'm a little bit confused because I think that do you have an alarm company or a security company?
Yes, we do.
And do they offer video services?
Yes.
And so would you have a way of monitoring who's coming and going using the video services provided by your alarm company?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I don't have that set up yet.
I understand, but you're asking for a variance of.
Just keep watching the video all the time, and then when I see someone walk on the property or someone looking over or hopping over, I should call the police?
Well,
because I'm in Seattle most of the time.
I understand that. I understand that. But I'm just asking whether you have video surveillance of your property.
Not at this time, I don't.
I see. Okay. Do you have evidence of specific security or safety breaches that have occurred?
No, nothing has occurred yet.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Because it's up now. I mean, it's been up since we tore the place down, and the reason we had to modify what was there is to get the construction vehicles in to tear down the buildings. We had to take it out for access.
Right, but you understand that, as Commissioner Lambert pointed out, you could simply put back what you had before that to the registered non-conforming height, and there would be no issue.
Yeah, 6 feet, just anyone can look over. Like Felipe said, he caught our neighbor taking pictures. It's the same neighbor that reported this.
I see.
Put her camera over and taking pictures of our yard, our houses. We don't know why she was doing that, but that's what happens.
Sure, but you recognize that it's legal to stand in the public right-of-way and take pictures of whatever you want, right?
Stretching your hand inside the head.
Entering property is a different story, but I want to clarify this. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we have one chit. Thank you. You have also 3 minutes at the end for rebuttal if you like.
Okay.
So we have one chit for public testimony. Jerry Rubin.
Thank you very, very much. Jerry Rubin, Santa Monica. And I'm a little bit confused by this one. If I'm hearing correctly, they have 7-foot hedges now, and they want to increase them to 10 feet. If it was the other way around, I'd probably say keep it, but 7 feet is pretty high. I mean, I don't know who holds their hand up and takes a picture. It doesn't sound like it would be that often, but even if it were 10 feet, you could get one of those sticks and hold something up, So I think, I don't think it's something to worry about. I'm glad you're taking care of the hedges. I'm glad you're leaving them at 7 feet and not trying to trim them down farther. As far as the community support, that's why I'm conflicted, because that sounds like something relevant. When you talk about compatible with the community, you'd think that 38 signatures of community support would show it's compatible with the community. So, but to me, it just seems like a 7-foot hedge is going to keep you pretty safe, and it's going to look good, more greenery, and just keep it well trimmed. I wouldn't worry about it that much. That suggestion about security cameras, and I just can't imagine whoever this person is that it would be any more than that singular person doing it. I don't know what the intention would be, but so again, I mean, I don't want to just say deny the appeal or support it, but I just wanted to speak my mind about it. Thanks.
You have a question?
I do. My understanding is there is currently no hedge on the vacant lot parcel, correct? So, right? So somewhat, but it's sort of...
There is a hedge on the front parcel line at 630, the vacant lot.
There is?
They're requesting a 10-foot height hedge.
And what is the current height of that? Would be 6 feet?
It's at actually, I think it's close to, one side of it's at 10 feet.
But it's allowed to be 6 feet? It's registered at 6 feet?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have one more public testimony from Mr. Or maybe Mrs. Watanabe.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Louis Watanabe, and I live at 615 23rd Street. So I walk by the property at least once a week because I go to St. Monica's. But I know Susan and David for a long time. I was at their wedding, and I've known David since junior high. Okay, and my Uncle Kay was actually retired as the city treasurer. And I want to say that what the Heckermans want is essentially a consistent look for the two properties since they own it. And I don't think that what they're asking for is something that's going to be negative for the community. So I would like to say that I support their appeal, and and like I said, my mother was born in Santa Monica, and I've lived in that house since 1969. So I've been here for a long time. So I want to just say that, and hope that you'll give that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no further questions. We're now closing the public hearing portion, and we're in discussion. Oh, yeah. Does the applicant want to speak again?
One of the things that I want to say regarding the comment by is that on the corner where it meets with the empty lot, if the hedges are 7 or 6 feet, whatever we are allowed to have, they start off at a point where they're 7, but because of the property, it's on a higher elevation. If we measure from the sidewalk on the corner of 2121 Alta, our hedges are only allowed to be about, let's say, 3 feet, because there is a small retaining wall there on the corner where you can see below the white sign. So on the other corner, that wall, that's like a retaining wall, it takes a slope down into the sidewalk level. So when we measure from the sidewalk, which I believe that's where you guys measure from, then the hedges will be on one corner 7 feet, and they end up like at 4 feet. And we want to keep it consistent when we measure from the bottom of the hedge to the top of the hedge, not from the sidewalk to the top of the hedge.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're in discussion now.
I move that we deny the appeal and uphold the zoning administrator's recommendation.
Second.
I would have to make, I have to make two motions. So that first motion was for 9A, 634 21st place.
Second, but I think we probably have to explain why, that we don't feel that they meet the criteria that.
Yeah, well, no, for the reasons that the zoning administrator
exactly.
stated.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean.
So I would like to add another reason is there may be reasons why somebody may want something and somebody else may not want it. But above all, we are trying to create a so-called level playing field. In other words, if this was granted, then anybody could show up and say, I want it, and we would have a very different looking city than we have today. In other words, there could be continuous hedges going all the way down the street. And once this precedent is set, it would be very hard to stop that. And so even though they may want that, really what they're speaking for without some overriding consideration, which I haven't heard yet, we don't want a city where everyone can have a 10-foot hedge by right practically. So that would be another reason why it might be denied. Is there any other discussion? Okay, call the question. So we're taking vote on the first property on the corner.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes.
Sheriff Fonda Bernardi?
Yes. Okay, now for the second motion regarding the 630 property.
I move that we deny the appeal and uphold the zoning administrator's recommendations for 630 21st place.
Commissioner Anderson?
What? We don't have a.
I'll say, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I actually wanted to say something about this one, if that's all right. Does it make clear, just so that the applicant is aware, that they are, to Commissioner Lambert's point, free within the 5-year period to restore the hedge that they had before the demolition? Is that clear in the statement of official action, or can that be communicated to them? Because I
think you just did.
Okay. Is that all right? I just want to make sure that that's noted.
Okay, we have a motion. It's been seconded. We're now hearing no further discussion. Ready to vote?
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes.
Sheriff Fonda Bernardi?
Yes. Okay. We're now on to item 10A, which is 3223 Wilshire. Are there any ex parte communications?
I have one on Sunday. I might have two, actually. On Sunday evening, around 5:30, I had a conversation with Linda Greenberg regarding her concerns about circulation at Centinela and Wilshire, which I'll circle back on. And I'll also, I believe I have had some conversations with, though I don't remember the date, with Tricia Crane regarding Northeast Neighbors' concerns about permit parking in the neighborhood, which I presume were related to this project as well. So I'll just note that too.
I used to buy my daughter's Halloween costumes at Oz, so I'm very familiar with the site.
Okay.
I received 2 emails, one from Taffy Patton and one from Tricia Crane, to my private email, so I just thought I would disclose that. I think it's the same one that went to all our city emails. It looks that way, but so it is.
I had the same 2 emails. Okay, so we're on to staff report.
Great. For the record, my name is Scott Albright, and I'm a senior planner in the City Planning Division. This evening, I'm going to be presenting to you a development review permit, as well as a vesting tentative tract map for the property at 3223 Wilshire Boulevard, proposed as a Tier 2 mixed-use commercial residential project. The site is along Wilshire Boulevard, where it's designated on the general plan for mixed-use boulevard uses, as well as zoned similarly for mixed-use boulevard. The parcel itself is a gateway parcel right there at the pretty much the entrance to the city. You can see the yellow dotted line represents the city boundary. It's about 19,500 square feet in area, and currently contains, as everybody knows, Oz, which was built in 1955, and it's not listed on the Historic Resources Inventory. And again, you can just see the context of this lower photograph here that shows clearly where the city boundary is with those two high-rise projects on the Los Angeles side of Centinela Avenue. The proposed project is 3 and 4 stories in height. It's about 49 feet, almost 50 feet, 2 inches short. The building itself is proposed at 40,395 square feet. The floor area ratio is below the 2.25, which is allowed under the general plan. 2.07 is proposed. The construction at this point is contemplated to be prefab construction, which is a means of reducing the project cost and development costs. So the applicant will be able to verify, in fact, if it still will be prefabricated. There are 53 residential units associated with this project. 4 of those will be affordable, and they will be affordable to the very low income income strata. There is some commercial space along Wilshire Boulevard at the ground floor level that kind of envelops a central courtyard. The project will be served with a 2-level subterranean automated parking garage. There will be space in there for 111 vehicles, which conforms to our city code, and 92 bicycle parking spaces, both long-term and short-term, will be provided on site. With all projects, we do have some open space requirements. A lot of the space will be private balcony space, which meets the minimum standards. And there's also some communal open space that's provided on site. There's a 2-tier central courtyard that we'll go over just a little bit more. And there's a really nice rooftop open space on the roof right above the 3rd floor level. Again, associated with this is a tentative tract map for a 3-unit airspace subdivision. That's part of, typically for financing purposes, where they break off the commercial, the residential, and the parking into airspace subdivision. In terms of the actual ground floor of the project, you can see that there is that central plaza, which kind of acts as the focal point for the project. That is primarily wrapped with commercial retail development. And one of the unique features of the building design is the use of bifold doors, which will really open up this space and enable it really to blend the outdoor and indoor space and make that space much larger than I think it's a little over about 1,100 square feet. So I think that's a really great opportunity. There's also a residential lobby. So this will be the lobby space that kind of finishes off the edge of the courtyard. This is really an important gesture here for really activating that courtyard on a 24-hour basis, putting eyes within that very public space there. There are also a couple of 4 residential units proposed on this elevation, 2 of which are the 2-bedroom units, and they are intended for affordable, or they're designated for affordable. Always, there is no alley to service this site, so all access will be for those appurtenant structures like loading, refuse, will be off the Centinela's portion of the site. And again, the project has some very nice pedestrian-oriented qualities. There's an appropriate amount of transparency along the ground floor level, along the building fringe. And then that angular building, the footprint, it kind of draws the pedestrian into that really the central space, and it really works very, very well. In terms of the upper level, they're all going to be primarily residential. This is where the remaining 49 residential units and the 2 remaining 1-bedroom affordable units. And also there is some common open space which is important to improve the residential quality of life. So there's a large, we'll say, a extension of the courtyard on this podium level or the 2nd floor level, as well as the roof deck that's on the 4th floor level. With both were open to the sky, and this one on the 4th floor has probably pretty good views towards the east, towards the city view, as well as towards the ocean and the sunset views as well. In terms of the roof, it's I've been identified for mechanical equipment, and that mechanical equipment is located on the center of the roof, which keeps it out of the public's visibility. And of course, there's been solar identified for the in conformance with the city's solar mandate requirements. There's a requirement of about 27.74 kilowatt hours, and they're exceeding that by providing about almost 45 kilowatt hours, so not quite doubling it, so, but certainly amply respecting our mandate there. We always run through the community benefits that are associated with Tier 2 projects. They're exceeding their affordable housing requirement as mandated, providing that 7.5%, which equates to 4 units. The unit mix will meet the standards in terms of bedroom count and the number of units per unit size. There are fees that are associated, increased fees that are associated with this in terms of the affordable housing, transportation impact fees, as well as parks and recreation. And there's always a requirement for transportation demand management plans to be implemented. As with all design review projects or Tier 2 projects, this went to the ARB for a preliminary design review back in December 3rd of 2018. They really liked certain aspects of the project design. They think the massing was beginning to address and be responsive to the adjacent residential community to the north. They did outline some concerns in terms of the communal open space, making sure it was meaningful in terms of its size and its location. They were concerned about the massing of the project and how it would affect those visual corridors. The project needs to respond to that gateway location at the entrance to the city. And then the scale of the ground floor level has to make sure it's adequately pedestrian oriented. In response, the applicant has been very, very responsive in terms of working with staff on refining the design. They have created that larger communal open space, particularly on the podium level, and reducing the massing as indicated here. So this is what the ARB saw back in December. This portion of the building has been removed here, and there's been a redesign of this so the stairway's pushed back and it opens up the view corridor. The bulk and massing at the gateway corner, again, that's addressing that. The transom window, there's been an addition of a transom window here, so it kind of scales down the storefronts a little bit to be more appropriate in terms of its pedestrian orientation. And the courtyard the residential lobby was relocated to be attached to the courtyard, which again provides that 24-hour activation. And here you can just kind of see a design comparison, with the top being what the ARB saw in December and what you are currently seeing this evening. In terms of the CEQA analysis, this was exempt from CEQA based on it being a transit priority project, as outlined in your staff report. And then we have done our public notification on this, and we did receive 2 requests, and I believe everybody has received these. We received from the Northeast Neighbors in support of the project, as well as the Residents Coalition. They both are in support of the project, but they did express concerns about the preferential parking and the use of preferential parking within the neighborhood. So with that, staff is recommending at this time that the commission approve development review permit and the vesting tentative tract map based on the findings outlined in your staff report, and also subject to those conditions that are noted there. And there's been a lot of discussion that the applicant has had with the neighbors in terms of addressing some of their concerns particularly about the parking, the preferential parking. There is some language that is suggested to address some of those issues, that if this is in fact volunteered by the applicant, our suggestion would be that these items be included within the project description. And there's also seems to be the new standard
Exactly.
Case management as well as corporate housing prohibition. So that language is there if, again, the applicant volunteers this information. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I understand that it'll be in the project description, but would it also be appropriate to put in the conditions about the permit parking?
We have, in the past, we've used these, but we've always just had these in the project description. So,
is there any problem with putting them in the conditions? So that basically it carries on if there's a new owner of the project? It wouldn't make a difference?
We would not include this as a condition.
But the project descriptions basically, it governs the project. So if some future owner has the building, he or she would be subject to what that says.
That's correct, yep.
And then I had asked a question, maybe it's better for discussion of, there's a lot of confusion about what we, the city, can do in terms of prohibiting people from participating in preferential parking districts. My understanding is that we can't legally. Is that because there's nothing in the code that allows us to, or is it just because it's not legal?
So it's something we're continuing to look into, and Heidi may want to chime in too, but my understanding is that it's difficult for the city to say that certain residents
Right.
can be restricted from parking on the street and other residents
I
aren't
understand.
restricted. So even though in this case it certainly makes sense, we're challenged to do that by some legal issues, I believe. Anything to add, Heidi?
Right. So currently, the code does not make any sort of differentiation between residents who are eligible to apply for preferential parking passes in a preferential parking zone.
No, I understand that. The question is whether
So-
it would be legal to do so.
Well, I think that's the
question
something
you're
we're
looking at.
into. But certainly under the ordinance as currently drafted, that's not
I understand.
an option. So that's why this would be voluntary.
I understand. So at this point, it's and this guy actually has volunteered to put that in the leases, right?
I think the applicant will be able to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sean?
I'll follow up on that before I go to the next. Do you distinguish between preferential parking permits and visitor parking permits? In other words, I understand that the residents would not be, under this language, the residents would not be able to get the kind of permanent stickers, permanent hang tags that folks get, but would they maintain their eligibility if they're having a party or something and there are not enough spaces in the structure to be able to get the street permits?
I would imagine that they would be able to.
They would be able to.
Yeah, I would think.
Well, that's my question.
That's a good question. I'm sorry, I don't
like
really.
Okay, I mean, it would be helpful. It'd be helpful to get a sense. It would be helpful to get a sense of that because.
I mean, in my neighborhood, we have preferred parking, but
Right.
you have to register to get guest parking with your number of your preferred parking pass.
That's a good point.
So if you don't have a preferred parking pass, you don't get guest parking because you are
Okay.
not part. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Makes sense to me too.
All right. So the question, as I mentioned, the ex parte, and we may hear about it from the public, but can you give us a sense of the circulation on the east side, the Centinela side? That's literally bordering with, that may be directly bordering with the city of LA, I believe it is. What's the entrance, exit? What's the flow of traffic?
So the flow is, so here, if you see this is the site plan, this being Centinela Avenue on the right-hand side
Yeah.
of your screen there. This would be the driveway. So the intent is, this is the driveway down to the subterranean.
Right.
This would be the loading zone right here. The intent is to have all of the traffic, obviously, is going to be predominantly coming off Wilshire Boulevard. And it will be making turns, on left-hand turns typically from Centinela into the site. I think there is a concern about left-hand turns from the project site onto Centinela.
Yes.
And there's been some discussion about, posting signage to prohibit that type of thing. We talked to Mobility about that, and they don't have any concern with if there was a condition added that restricted that left turn movement from the project site onto Centinela.
They'd be okay with that?
Yeah.
What can you tell us what's happening on the other side of Centinela?
So on the other side of Centinela is there's a retail commercial small part of it's in the city, the other part's in the city of Los Angeles, so it's an odd configuration. There's a rear parking lot that pretty much lines up with this driveway. So this is almost like an intersection here. So there's a lot of fail safes in place in terms of turning movements. There's going to be the sight triangles at the driveway at the apron there. There's also the garage itself flattens out up here, so there won't be any visibility issues there. So it's going to be like a typical intersection in terms of, I mean, if we have that left turn restriction, then it's going to make it, but there shouldn't be any visibility issues. It lines up. There's not a weird dog leg where it creates that.
Yeah.
So that's the intent. And Mobility has been working with the the applicant team to address that issue. and make sure.
And so the city's, you're cool with a right turn, with a mandated right turn?
Yes, and we confirmed that with mobility as well.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot one. On page 15, the Affordable Housing Commercial Linkage Fee Program and the Transportation Impact Fee Program, are these numbers literally $43 and $159?
According to our spreadsheet, yes. Because they get a credit for their existing development, and it shocked me just as much, and I was almost embarrassed to put it on the screen. So because it seems so minimal, but that's how it worked out in terms of what they'll be obligated to provide.
Of course, these numbers aren't binding. We will confirm the calculation of fees during plan check.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hearing no further questions, can we hear from the applicant?
Good evening, Commission. Dave Rand with Armbruster Goldsmith in Delvac. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight on behalf of the applicant, my client, Cypress Equity Investments. 5 years ago, or thereabouts, I think two of you were on the commission when we floated up on a housing project at Wilshire Berkeley. That project, which never came to fruition, probably remains the most acrimonious, difficult project that I was ever involved with in my entire career. And after the demise of that project, the ignominious demise of that project and its cousin at Jerry's Liquor, there were questions about whether or not housing was going to happen on Wilshire Boulevard. And if it was going to happen, was every housing project that deigned to come forward going to be such a war and a battle that it was going to drag out and be painful and miserable for all involved? And I am really happy to be before you tonight and say, in fact, that thesis has been disproven. Disproven by this project, which has been a model of collaboration with the staff, and I want to thank Scott Albright and the urban designer, Stephanie Reich, for rolling up their sleeves and being very involved in every aspect of this project. Extensive collaboration with our immediate neighbors. This applicant met with the neighbors and different groups and individuals 15 times during the duration of the process. I want to particularly thank the Northeast neighbors, our one-time adversaries and now friends, Tricia Crane, for working with us and for issuing a support letter, which I'm very, very pleased and happy that they did that. We were able to get to this point. And I want to summarize some of the things that we have committed to them that are important for the record, and that I want to make sure you're aware of, understanding your limitations with respect to conditions, but your expansive ability when it comes to a very long project description. We have committed to restrict permit parking for the tenants, and we will do that in a very meaningful way by voluntarily recording a covenant against the property, prohibiting that and making sure that that's embedded in tenant leases for this owner and any successor owner there too. We worked with our immediate neighbors, the condo building on Centinela, to reorient the windows to make sure that we mitigated privacy impacts to that immediate neighbor. We moved the roof deck and the rooftop activity away from them towards Wilshire Boulevard to minimize noise effects. We changed the balcony configuration on that facade from clear glass to opaque balconies, which we thought was a nice adjacency concession. We have committed to working with them on landscape screening to make sure that there's a nice buffer between the two properties. And we have worked not only with our condo neighbors, the Northeast neighbors, but also the neighbors that extend along Centinela, some of which I see in the audience today, on the circulation concerns that Commissioner Landris mentioned, that we will have no left turn signage to orient people coming out of the building towards Wilshire Boulevard to minimize the impact on Centinela and the likelihood for traffic conflicts on that, what is a very busy street. We also worked with the ARB and responded to them, as Mr. Albright very adequately documented, summarized. We've expanded the common open space in the building significantly per their direction. We've changed the facade to soften, warm the building by adding wood elements and materials, which we think make this a much nicer design. So it's been a real pleasure on this one, I have to say, and we hope you view this project the same way. And thank you again for all the neighbors' involvement and effort, and thank you to my applicant who worked very well with them and made a number of concessions. And with that, I want to turn it over to the architect, who's here all the way from Berkeley, from the firm Piatok, if I said that correctly. Kevin, who's going to walk you through the design, give you a little bit more orientation about the project and his thoughts in terms of the architecture, and then we'd be glad to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Kevin Markarian with Piatok Architects. I'm principal there, and our firm is based actually in Oakland, and we specialize in multifamily mixed-use projects, affordable housing, and market rate housing. So, this is actually probably one of my favorite projects, honestly, in terms of its scale. It's a nice infill size. We really enjoyed working with the neighbors, planning staff, and the ARB on refining the design. So like a lot of projects, it starts as kind of a massing diagram, and then it took this life of its own. And there we go. So we're really interested, I want a tough act to follow with Scott and Dave. I'll try to hit some highlights. Really want to create a sense of a gateway coming into the city with along Wilshire. And part of that was this idea of moving that roof deck away from the neighbors and to the corner and taking advantage of the views up and down Wilshire. So that's right there, and then pushing our circulation back, and just the big move of orienting our courtyard and opening up to Wilshire so that the building could breathe. And that was a suggestion really early on from planning staff, and it really helps the building kind of feel more broken up and more sensitive to the neighbors, and transitions the scale down to the neighborhood. So, there are high rises across the street from us and down the block, and this project just was really exciting for us in a way of breaking down that massing and finding a way to transition scales in the neighborhood. And like every project, we start with solar studies and wind studies to see, how can we take advantage of that courtyard orientation to get better light into the project and whatnot, and take advantage of the views up and down Wilshire Boulevard. And so this is a simple massing diagram showing how, step one obviously is just the basic program. Step two is your zoning, setbacks and daylight planes. Step three was opening it up to Wilshire. Step four was pushing and pulling to take advantage of the views, and then really enhance the public realm by pulling the facade back at the sidewalk so it didn't create this really hard, mean edge in an urban condition, and then tie the massing all together with articulation. And I think a lot of those concessions and discussions were mentioned with the neighbor. I think one thing I'll kind of point out is we are looking at offsite fabrication, although I don't think there's a lot of monetary savings. We're hearing nowadays this might be 5%, but really it's more about time savings potentially. So it's something we're exploring. The construction industry is changing, and a lot of contractors who can do this in a standard way are trying to compete with that. So the costs are not really a big factor in this. But the big move here obviously was orienting that retail to the courtyard and the lobby, and then we talked about all the other things about traffic and circulation. Here's that diagram of our north facade. The owner went and had the neighboring property surveyed, and this is in your packet. And so all their windows are located, which are the darker blue windows, and then we overlay that with our building, and then try to minimize the direct line of sight between us and them. And this is actually the first time I've ever done this, and it's a really effective way of using that tool to design our building and be responsive. And then got really excited when our landscape architect got involved and started developing this further, and just imagining this outdoor room and really enhancing the public realm and creating that relationship and creating a sense of place where people can kind of gather and enjoy the retail. And that's what that street frontage looks like. and really warming up that facade with materials like wood and metal and just the planting palette. And then that's that central courtyard. So, and that's it.
I have
Thank
a
you.
question.
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand, the retail goes back under the property, right?
Correct.
So it is covered by the platform courtyard for the residents?
That's correct. So it's 50-foot deep retail here, and then the podium up here is a landscape courtyard amenity space for the residents.
I understand. It's interesting. Thank you. Actually, congratulations on, I like the design, actually.
Thank you.
And working with the community. You guys should go on the road and tell other people how to do it.
Okay, Sean?
Thank you. So I've a quick question for you, and then questions for Mr. Rand. And I also appreciate these the very thoughtful setup here in the drawings as well, walking us from the program to where you landed. It's great. We just can't win with these mics tonight, can we? So the west. I'm just curious. The west side of the property, where you have 4 units, 2 bedrooms and 2 studios. What's is that their backyard? Is that a front? Is the access is from inside the building, right? To the unit.
Yes.
So these are kind of backyards for them.
Yes.
What are those backyard? There's I think my kid used to go to a coding thing, camp at the building next door. That's just sort of a big cement wall, right? Right there. How far? I mean, I'm just curious on whether it's landscaping or if there's fence. How are you shielding those 4 units from the buildings?
There'll be fencing and planting. I mean, let me go to landscape plan.
Okay.
I have to. There. Yep. Yeah. So we're going to work with the neighbors on the planting palette exactly, but there'll be some fencing and planting along these edges.
Okay, so they'll have some screening with any windows that might be on the east side of the building to the west.
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. It looks great. And Mr. Rand, I'm sitting in Commissioner McKinnon's chair tonight.
Somebody
but
has to.
Everything is really upside down, so I'll just channel him. I'm shocked, Mr. Rand.
It's an outrage. It's an outrage,
shocked.
Isn't it?
But I'm not dismayed. I'm really pleased. Can we go back to the slide where if volunteered by the applicant, by any chance?
Scott's really taking all the fun out of our back
I
and
know.
forth dialogue now.
I even heard you offer something and successor there too, but I don't think it was on corporate housing.
No, it was not. You heard correctly.
There it is.
There you go. There we go. Would you like to do the honors?
Preferential parking prohibition. Yes, we consent to that to be included in the project description. Case management condition for affordable units. Yes, acceptable as written.
Great.
As is the corporate housing definition on the screen. All good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that quick?
Okay, I have a couple of questions for the architect. What's that? Yes, there is. It's coming up. A couple of questions. You seem to have included a dog run in this project. Is that true, or did I misunderstand your drawings?
At one point, we considered it. I think we had to take it out because of the adjacency to the units. I think programmatically it wasn't going to work.
Now that walkway that's going down the west side, is that essential for your exiting?
No.
Could the patios, which are very small on that side, be enlarged.
Yes, we actually are, and the design was being updated to make them larger because we realized we didn't need that pathway.
Okay. And then the next question is, there's some reason that you restrained yourself on the roof photovoltaics.
Restrained.
And you left some roof space on the table, so to speak. And we have a, we're trying to get to net zero in the city and as a state.
Right.
And why wouldn't you go there today?
We don't have the roof plan in this set, but we tried to maximize as much as we could. I think, barring any feedback from the city in terms of fire access and those kinds of things, I think we wanted to make sure we had appropriate pathways for maintenance and fire access on the roof, so we didn't consume the whole roof.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is that you can push that without breaking up a sweat and really go for, quite a bounce. Like your whole east side is void of collectors. It's kind of like,
we're going to work with a designer to kind of optimize the layout.
You really should optimize for that. Okay.
I think we want to size it for our loads.
Well, you can't size it for your loads. You got to size it for the next 10, 15, 30 years when everyone's driving electric cars. That's your load. It's not your load today. Your load is what's coming down the pike. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. It's time for public testimony. And Tricia Crane.
Good evening. Tricia Crane, Chair of Northeast Neighbors. It is a nice meeting tonight, isn't it? It's really gone very well. The Board of Northeast Neighbors supports this project for 3223 Wilshire with deed restriction language stating that all future tenants are prohibited from applying to or enrolling in the city's preferential parking permit program. We appreciate the development team's outreach efforts and many meetings with us and with the neighbors. We also appreciate the offer to address the unbundled parking issue in deed restrictive language in the project description. However, as we have communicated to you in the past, we feel strongly that the city must also take action on this matter and revise the code. It should be city policy that preferential parking permits are not available to tenants of buildings with unbundled parking. According to experts in transportation demand management, quote, for the unbundling of parking to function efficiently as a TDM measure, local officials must regulate nearby on-street parking to avoid spillover problems that could result if residents use on-street parking to avoid paying rents for parking spaces. Unless the city of Santa Monica closes this loophole, unbundled parking will degrade the quality of the life in the neighborhood. It will also undermine the goals of the program to encourage transit use. We have previously expressed our concern about the need to address this loophole in the zoning ordinance with the city planner, planning staff, and the city council. And despite assurances that it would be closed after the completion of the zoning ordinance, no action has ever been taken. I should point out that last week, City Council voted that no preferential parking passes will be allowed for the future residents of the 2 new housing developments approved for the 2 parcels adjacent to Casa del Mar and Shutters. And this action by the council was taken to protect the adjacent neighborhood. This is what we ask for the neighbors of 3223 Wilshire and of all neighbors of unbundled projects. And I spoke today a little bit about this with Council Member Gleam Davis, and I'm hoping that we can move this forward because it's a problem that will happen if it hasn't already. So thank you.
Ms. Crane? Ms. Crane, I have a question. Because I share this priority, and I'm wondering whether because you've achieved some good language here that could be a model for us moving forward. Were there any learnings from your interactions with the developer that would be helpful for us to know in terms of how this ought to play out?
Well, their understanding of it was just that it was something that we needed as neighbors, and they were wanting us to support the project, and they were under the impression that the thinking of the residents matters in the city, and I believe it does. And there's much that has been written about this. It's not difficult. It is simply needs to be in the zoning ordinance in some fashion. I don't know that there are any legal dimensions to this. I know that the city planner has offered to inquire whether there are any reasons why this is, for whatever reason, wouldn't fit. I can't tell you myself.
And does Northeast Neighbors make a distinction between permanent residential preferential permits and visitor, those one-day permits?
Well, I think that Commissioner Lambert understands that they really are part and parcel of each other. I think they, and the team, it was very interesting. This team we had some great meetings, and they really do believe in the vision of a project that will not need as many cars as we sort of assume. And they see their goals as being well served by restriction to access to the street, because that's what we all hope for.
Yeah, exactly.
So why have unbundled parking if we then leave the option of this? The truth is the preferential permits cost $30 a year, something like that. As I understand it, these parking spaces will be $100 a month. So, there's a real incentive to go after the permits. And I don't live on this street, but the folks who do will already feel the pressure from the boulevard, from the customers. And there will be a restaurant there, so there will be pressures from that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve Prince, followed by Ralph Metcher, followed by Jerry Rubin.
Hi, thank you. I live in the condos next door to the development, and I just wanted to thank them for meeting with us, for being responsive to our requests and accommodating us. Our main concerns, as Tricia mentioned, are the preferential parking, but also the flow of traffic that is going to come onto Centinela, that stop sign over there. We would appreciate, some kind of left turn. No left turn signal or something. It really is a busy intersection, and without a light right there, that turn is really tricky. You've got cars coming from every direction, and that's our biggest concern. So thanks.
Is there a left turn lane on Wilshire at that intersection?
On Wilshire? Well, there's the one on. Yeah, there is, right? Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Ralph Metcher.
Good evening, everybody. Ralph Metcher. I'm a resident of Centinela Avenue. And I will add to the kudos for an amazing development team that came with an interesting project and were more than willing to meet with neighbors and talk about very specific issues and come back with interesting ideas of how to resolve those. I mean, I think that the things that are most important are with the adjacent neighbors are continuing to work out that would be the north property line, the fence, and what its makeup is, and the landscape, and that will move forward. Also, ensuring that the opaque decks are the fully opaque decks are there when they're looking into them. And in general for the neighborhood, it's the right turn only out of the garage. Hopefully, people will feel that they are restricted from making a left turn. I don't know, again, whether our ordinance is about that actually being a ticketable item if somebody were to see it or something. What you have there is an intersection. So you're going to have this driveway. There's the commercial stores across the street who have a driveway that's very active, actually. When you get to the corner, there are left and right turns from Wilshire coming in. The Centinela is not linear there, so people are making left turns to get out and waiting to shoot in. So I really think it's something that the mobility division should take a really close look at whether there should be restrictions on left turns off of Wilshire, or what should be done to to create some safety there. There's going to be a lot of cars. We feel strongly about the preferential parking issue. I think it's an opportunity of something to look at. When there is an SB 50 that the state legislature passes, and it allows people to build projects with less parking, and they will, but then, and if people can then buy $30 permits to park in the neighborhood, they will. So, I think it's if we want people, if we want the transportation system to be used and we want people out of their cars, we have to incentivize them, in how to do that. One, by having good transportation, but, then sort of penalizing them in ways that really, make that happen. Just so bring that back and have those discussions, and let's be proactive about that. There's 2-hour free parking there now, and so there are people who come every 2 hours and move their cars. It's not egregious, but it's even gone around the corner. But there is really no need to allow people to park there overnight. I think they can have their parties. They should be able to get their permits for that, on an occasional basis. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Go. I have a question just for clarification, because I think we may be talking about two different things based on what the previous gentleman also said. Folks are asking for a right turn restriction with respect to the project.
Correct.
Exiting the parking onto Centinela. What I think I just want to understand, I've heard you say and the gentleman before, is that you also have a concern about whether or not there ought to be a right turn restriction from Centinela onto Wilshire?
No.
Okay.
Potentially particularly a left turn restriction from Wilshire onto Centinela.
Well, there's a pocket. I'm looking at it right now. There's a pocket lane to allow people to turn left from Wilshire onto Centinela.
Just come by there, a couple times.
No, I know the neighborhood. Do you know when you make a left turn onto Wilshire from Centinela, do you have access to that pocket lane? Very short pocket lane in the middle, or no?
It's not a safe condition. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, because people are supposed to stop. There's the light, and you're supposed to stop. Wait here.
Right.
But a lot of people just rush up and they fill it up. And so if you're going to make that left turn, is there room for you to pull in, to keep going?
So we can't, we can't on
Yes.
this project, but we certainly informally could be asking mobility to keep
Right.
an eye on this.
Exactly, to
Right.
take a look at it.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Jerry Rubin.
Thank you very, very much, and happy May Day, and anytime you can get Dave Rand and Tricia Crane to shake hands, it's a good celebration. I'd like to get a cell phone picture of them shaking hands. But this is a good time. I mean, city staff was pretty pleased with the way things are going. ARB, the neighborhood group, Northeast Neighbors, the developer, and darn, we need housing. We need it bad. I hope this is something that keeps going, because it shows that collaboration is the real way to go. I think everyone can be on the same page with hearts in the right place. Needless to say, I think it's a great design. Architect coming down from Berkeley deserves some good applause there. It's a beautiful design. I like the open courtyard thing too. It looks pretty cool. I agree with Chair Fondo Bernardi, though. This is a good opportunity to get more stuff on the roof, though, to promote good energy, solar energy. And other than that, I just think this is a happy time, and I do want to get that picture here, so stick around. Thank you very much.
Okay. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question. Are we ready for discussion? Are we closing the public hearing?
Yes, we are closing public hearing. Oh, you get your 3 minutes or more.
Two quick things for the project description. One, I think staff wanted me to clarify that we would like memorialize in the project description that there should be right turn only signage out of the driveway, no left turn signs. And second, that we would welcome language in the project description that we will endeavor to maximize the available space on the roof for solar to the fullest extent possible, not utilized by mechanical equipment and other rooftop programming. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Amy.
No, I have a question for Mr. Rand before the discussion.
Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. She was first.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a question for the architect, too.
Okay.
It's beautiful. I like it a lot. The one thing that I'm kind of wondering about are the, from a plan view, these polygons of landscaping. And I guess I'm just interested in hearing you kind of, from a vision or approach standpoint, what these are doing, because I guess on the one hand, I really appreciate that the ground floor is set back and it creates that open space along Wilshire Boulevard, but I also kind of start to feel like there's a trade-off in, especially when there's columns, when you push that ground floor back, because I feel like you lose a little bit of the vibrancy that you might otherwise get by having a storefront or a restaurant kind of, right on the sidewalk. And to me, the planters are, I don't know, feeling like this other separation between the public sidewalk and the activity of the storefront. So I'm just interested in.
So as you probably look through the plans, below this is all garage, and so these are raised planters, and so in order not to have to dig down further, these planters are raised about 18 inches to 24 or so, and so to get the planting, they're just built up a little bit in order to get sufficient depth for planting. And I think the idea is just to soften that edge, really. Pulling the storefront back was really just a way to have better line of sight into that courtyard and enhance that transparency. So that was really the idea there. And also shade the storefront, because by pulling it back, then it was a solar strategy, because the worst solar orientation is down and to the left, so to the southwest. So the idea by pulling it back was to get some shading of that storefront.
And I understood why it was raised. That wasn't really my question. I think my question was really like, why plop a planter in the middle of the courtyard along the sidewalk? Because right? And I think what I'm hearing you say is, from your perspective, it's creating a softening, right? Whereas in my mind, it's kind of creating this separation from the activity.
It may be doing a little bit of both, because I think also we want a place for people to sit, so also feel a little bit of sense of when they're sitting.
Enclosure
When they're sitting, and when you're standing, you can see over. Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, just a couple of questions, maybe for the architect and for Mr. Rand. The common roof deck, that's covered, right? Is that covered? That corner at Wilshire and Centinela?
Go back.
Or is that open? It's slab. It is.
It's a trellis.
It's a trellis. Okay. So would that be the space that might be available if there were any meetings related to the case management and or support services? Okay, that's great. And then so what will the policies be regarding guest parking for residents of the apartments?
The project provides guest parking per the zoning ordinance. This is one overlay of the city where there's actually mandatory guest parking required. So we maintain that we have sufficient guest parking as part of the building, and we don't believe there's a separate program. I think Commissioner Lambert articulated it correctly, that there's no
Right.
separate program for visitor passes that's not connected to the preferential program that we're not involved with.
Which is why I'm going to ask the question that I'm going to ask, and I appreciate what you volunteered and I fully support it. What I want to make sure, because this is going to be one of the first times that we're doing this, is from an ADA standpoint, if we have residents who have caregivers, and residents are having their caregivers park in the guest spaces, that those folks aren't going to get hassled, because everywhere else in the city, it would be typical to use a permanent, would get a visitor hang tag or something like that. I'm familiar with people on the block. I just want to make sure that we are, for folks with disabilities, seniors, if there is a situation with a caregiver, that they're going to be okay, and we're not going to end up with somebody being told that on top of their situation, they've got to, pay through the nose because that space is being used more frequently than just to drop by for a cup of coffee.
No, I think there's adequate parking
Okay.
in the building to accommodate that, and
Great.
and that's what the guest parking requirement is really for and meant to serve. So I don't think we've got an issue on ADA compliance, and if there are residents in the building that have caregivers.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'd like to move approval.
Second.
All right.
I was going to say I didn't want to upset the Love Fest, so we're going to buy anything you ask for. Okay.
I actually moving approval. I just want to take 2 seconds to again express my appreciation to Northeast Neighbors in raising this policy level concern about the relationship between the preferential parking and the unbundled parking, because in addition to it, being a concern about neighborhood quality of life, I think it is an issue in terms of undermining a policy that is designed to encourage people to use alternative forms of transit. So I think for both of those reasons, it's important that we kind of look at how to make some changes.
I also want to thank the architect and the team. I think it may have to do, I know you say you're from Oakland, but Telegraph Avenue has always meant Berkeley to me, so that may have something to do with how cooperative you are and neighborhood oriented.
Okay. We've had a motion. It's been seconded.
Is the motion presumably includes all the project description language that's been volunteered by the applicant?
Yes.
Just for the record.
Okay, Nina?
Yes.
I just wanted to share the love, basically, and just point out that love works a lot better than lawsuits, and I'm really grateful for this. Thank you.
And I would second that this project, there are very few projects that check all the boxes, and this one does on all these different levels, including those last. It's a clear sign you've been taken over by aliens, Dave. I can't explain it. I mean, I'm getting
Shocked,
these things
Mr.
here.
Rand. Shocked.
Maybe. But I would like to commend the design team for, it's not easy to work through Santa Monica. It's not easy to work through neighborhood groups that really know what they need, know what they want. And it seems like you've reached a good common ground. And it will be a model for other neighborhoods and other projects to reach this high standard. So I appreciate you guys raising the bar for everybody. And that's valuable. It makes everyone's life a lot easier. So with that, Jason, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just briefly want to note that as the loose was being considered and drafted, I think the vision was something like this, where there would be collaboration between the applicants and the community, seeking really the best possible outcomes. And I'm so glad that even though it's 9 years later, we're striking that note that we really were working toward with that document.
Okay, with that, I'd like to have the vote taken. No further discussion.
We have a motion and a second. We had a motion.
Yeah. And we had a second?
Yep.
We had a second, yeah.
It's either
Leslie
Sean
and
or
I.
me.
I think there were like
Leslie and I.
four
I'll
people that
take it.
jumped on that.
Okay.
And there are those amendments that were offered at the last minute,
Yes.
and you've captured those, okay.
And you'll bring us back language on the left, the right, I think everything we saw language for except the right turn, the no right turn.
Right,
I
we
mean,
will bring
no
that back
left
in.
turn, excuse me.
Or right turn only.
Right turn only.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco.
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert.
Yes.
Commissioner Landris.
Yes.
Commissioner Perry.
Yes.
Chair Fondo Bernardi.
Yes. So then I'd like to have an analogous motion for vesting the tract map, the parcel map.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, could we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco.
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert.
Yes.
Commissioner Landris.
Yes.
Commissioner Perry.
Yes.
Chair Fondo Bernardi.
Yes. Let me ask you a question. We have the statement of official action, but we've had some amendments to it.
We'll bring that back for
Can
you.
you bring that back for us? Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute break. That's, okay, move fast. Yeah. We have the most important thing on the item, the SOR. No, it's a lot of discussion. It's really why we're here.
Sorry. Yeah, it was sent out yesterday.
Nina, are we ready? Ready to get going?
We're at record pace. I think we did an item a minute there.
Okay, that's fine, yeah. Okay, we're item 10C, which is the SRO standards, if you will. And any ex parte communication, I suppose you haven't, unless you've talked to anyone about it. Okay, so Roxanne, the floor is yours.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. So just to start out this item, there is a staff report before you. I'm going to run through what I think are the key highlights and allow for this discussion to unfold. If you have questions, feel free to ask me. I'm not going to go over every aspect of the timeline on this, but I will walk you through the major points. So this item before you tonight is a discussion and a consideration of whether to make a recommendation and what that recommendation would be to council on a potential zoning ordinance amendment restricting market rate, single room occupancy housing or SRO housing. That red line is before you. That is what we're seeking a recommendation from Planning Commission on, and we're looking to forward that recommendation to Council on May 14th. In terms of background, I did get some questions from commissioners asking about just reminding of the steps and how we've gotten here to this evening, so I've went ahead and laid that out in slide format for you. So going back with respect to SRO housing, we started this discussion on March 20th with the Planning Commission's issuance of a resolution of intention or an ROI to consider potential recommendations to the ordinance addressing SRO housing. That resolution we have on file, and it was broad in nature to allow for a broad variety of potential changes to be considered. Following that, with that resolution of intention, the City Council adopted an urgency interim zoning ordinance number 2604 on March 26th that instituted a temporary 45-day restriction on SRO uses. That ordinance did provide express exemptions for 100% affordable housing projects that are also SRO housing, and also exempted specialized housing uses such as supportive and transitional housing. That ordinance went into effect immediately upon adoption and is in effect until May 10th, 2019. That ordinance was provided and adopted in order to provide time to study options on how to manage market rate SRO housing. Following the Council's action on March 26th, staff brought forward on April 3rd seeking conceptual recommendations on a concept for development standards modifications addressing SRO housing. In that particular instance, we did establish a differentiation between market rate types and also that affordable and supportive housing type. Staff proposed new development standards primarily related to common area enhancements and requirements. There were some also development standards set forth about the size of the units that would be market rate and regulated. This commission voted 6-1 in support of that approach, while specifically speaking to the need to address all of the policy issues raised around these emerging housing models that we have been discussing, including SRO housing. And that the concept with respect to enhanced common area requirements is a good start, but that continued study is necessary. So that information was presented to Council on April 23rd, where that same proposal that Planning Commission reviewed was put forward to Council. Council did adopt an emergency IZO 2609, establishing the development standards and the common area requirements applicable only to market rate SRO housing. That ordinance went into effect immediately and is good for a period of 60 days or until June 22nd. As with all emergency ordinances, that's subject to extension. That was, again, applicable only to the market rate type. At that time, Council did express some concern with that approach, although staff did recommend at that time that this emergency IZO was really a precursor to staff's ongoing work to study all of the housing model, the new housing models that have been under discussion, co-living, medium-term housing, pod share, and also SRO housing. And so that was part of the staff discussion on April 23rd. Council, as I noted, did express some concern that the staff proposal addressing the development standards and new regulations on market rate SROs is insufficient in terms of really supporting the council's goal of producing a diverse housing stock. That diverse housing stock really looking at a range of housing types and also housing that meets the needs of different income levels and all household sizes. At that time, based on the council discussion, staff has been directed to bring back expeditiously and in a comprehensive manner a full analysis of the new housing models, including SRO housing. That is something that staff is currently working on, and this proposal this evening that's in red line form is a result of that council discussion on the 23rd. So what's before you is in red line. This is, I don't think I need to spend much time, but this is again the restriction on market rate, non-rent restricted SRO housing projects with the continued exemption, with the idea that we would continue to permit SRO housing for 100% affordable housing projects.
What do you mean by restrict market rate SRO housing projects?
So that means that those would not be permitted.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
We would, within the context of continuing to allow 100% affordable housing SRO projects and also continuing to allow SRO projects that are of the supportive and specialized housing types. If this item will be before council, scheduled for a first reading of the ordinance on May 14th. If adopted, a second reading of the ordinance would be scheduled on May 28th, with the first reading and second reading format. The effective date of such an ordinance would be June 28th, 2019.
So there would be a 6-day gap?
What?
There would be it says that the urgency ordinance expires June 22nd.
No, the urgency.
So that would be the ordinance, the emergency ordinance addressing the common area requirements would be set to expire on June 22nd, subject to extension. In this case, between the two, conceivably there's a gap, yes. So that is what's before you for discussion. We just want to make clear that staff is working on the new housing models ordinance or options to bring forward both to Planning Commission and then to Council. We anticipate that coming forward as soon as possible. Summer seems like the most feasible time frame. We'd be looking consistent with applicable law to ensure that per Council that policy objective is achieved through this new forthcoming ordinance addressing the development of a range of housing types consistent with all of our DCP and loose policies.
I have some questions.
Sure.
Please.
How did this happen? I mean, did the city council direct us or you to come to us with basically a ban on market rate SRO housing? Was that what they asked for? I mean, I didn't hear the meeting.
So in Council's discussion as part of its action to adopt the emergency IZO addressing common area, part of their discussion was that, yes, they did want options, but also this idea that was there a way to extend the restrictions so that we could continue to let the policy discussion catch up, and there's not a way to extend the ordinance 2604 on an emergency basis. This would need to go through first.
The urgency one can't be extended, but the emergency one could.
The emergency ordinance could be, yes.
But they don't like the development standards that we adopted. Was that what happened?
My understanding, well, they did adopt it, so I think they felt that there was some utility in it. I will say from the staff perspective that concept of enhanced common area requirements would be something that would get folded into the new housing models ordinance and options that are presented. We do intend to fold that in as a concept and continue to study it.
I'm just confused about why we're looking at a permanent zoning ordinance amendment banning SROs, while we're supposed to be looking at all these different housing models and market trends and what have you. We have a permanent thing on the books that says you can't build SROs. I mean, I don't understand, and I don't expect you to explain that, understand their thinking. Any insight? Or is that too much to ask?
I think what we're doing is we would be taking this back to council to give them an option. There was some frustration when we were before council last month, that we didn't come back with exactly what had been requested. So this is to give the council the option to adopt this ordinance while we continue to work on these housing issues, as Roxanne
Well, there's
explained.
a giant gap between the development standards that we recommended and banning them altogether. So it just seems like something very drastic happened at that city council meeting that I don't quite get. While we're supposed to be exploring all these different housing options while we're banning SROs permanently.
And it's certainly, at least from staff's perspective, not intended to be a permanent. It's to have something in effect while we continue to look at these different housing models.
But it is permanent. I mean, as we're recommending, it's a permanent amendment of the zoning ordinance. Of course, it could be changed.
Right.
Why don't they just do, if they want to ban them, why don't they just do an emergency ordinance that would do that while we do everything else? Which I don't support either, but I mean, that's...
Right. So state law is very specific with how long a ban can be on a specific use. So you can do the initial 45 days as it was done.
That's the urgency. I'm talking about the emergency.
Well,
the emergency ordinance, April 23rd.
So council explained that they wanted options other than the emergency ordinance.
I got it.
Wait, can you expand on that though? So an emergency ordinance is
Okay.
for how long?
Right. So the emergency ordinance is actually an ordinance that is that lives under the city's zoning ordinance.
Mhm.
That's the authority under the city zoning ordinance. So those are initial 60 days and can be extended for up to 5 years.
Yeah, like the R1 that we're doing. So I just don't get why we're doing basically a zoning code amendment when we could do an extension and a change in the emergency ordinance.
Can I
I mean,
ask-
I don't agree with that either, but it just seems like this is kind of drastic. Personally, that's my opinion. I also wonder, and I don't want to put you on the spot, and maybe it's not even the place to discuss it. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I can read, and sometimes I understand what I'm reading. And I cannot imagine how this is compatible with the state code.
So my follow-up question is
So
that.
why don't you, maybe she could answer that. Or maybe you can't answer it.
Well, can I specifically ask the question?
Yeah.
Okay. My question's related.
Okay, so I will start, and perhaps Commissioner Landers' question will piggyback off of what I will say. So certainly we have reviewed state law, and we understand that, I think as I explained last time we had this discussion, it is a new law. We don't have any judicial guidance on the law, on AB 352. The city would not be actually placing a numerical limitation on the number of SRO units
Well,
in the
except
city.
you're banning market rate SROs. Okay, all right.
I understand. All right. So the city, again, we have reviewed it against state law, and there's a couple things that happen with SB 352. First of all, that section of the Health and Safety Code has always been permissive and not mandatory.
Mhm.
The city has never been obligated to allow for these sorts of units. The additional language that was added at the beginning of 2018 added a couple of dimensions to it. The first one is if you allow for these sorts of units,
Mhm.
then you cannot limit the number within the half mile of transit. But it also specifically states that the city does retain zoning authority with respect to, it doesn't take away the city zoning authority entirely. So what this proposal does is, within the city zoning authority, create a use classification and prohibit that use classification, but does not place a numerical limitation on the number of SRO units.
Well, the section of the code which I have here is, you're right, if you allow any SROs, be they seniors or affordable, you can't prohibit other kinds of SROs. But what you are allowed to do is to...
No, you cannot place it. You
It's
cannot
right
place
here.
a limit on the number, which is different.
Right, you can't. But I would assume they don't intend for you to go to zero.
We're not going to zero.
You can regulate density, setbacks, lot coverage, and height restrictions. You can't limit SRO construction based on affordability. Nowhere is that an allowance in here. So, I mean, I don't want to get into a legal discussion, but it just doesn't seem to jive for me.
So as you hear me say often, we always try to read the city's discretion as broadly as possible within the bounds of the law, and that's what we're doing.
Okay. So in terms of timing for the rest of this grand scheme that we're going to do, the co-housing, the pods, everything else, how does that's just something subsequent to what we're supposed to do tonight? And if we have to change the zoning ordinance to reallow SROs, that would happen somewhere down the road? Or
Yes.
not?
We will bring forward options addressing the new housing models, which will include a proposal for SRO housing in some form. Staff is working on that as we speak. If a code change, there would be a number of code changes contemplated through the introduction of a new housing models ordinance. That those topics reach over a wide number of sections of the code.
I just noticed my old friend Miguel Santiago is the author of this legislation. I knew him when he was basically a child intern, which says a lot about me and his age. But I may want to discuss this with him. So, I mean, I have a lot to talk about other than just questions to you, so I'll defer to someone else.
Amy.
I have a question or maybe a comment, but do we have any public chits?
We do.
Okay. So I'll maybe wait until we hear from the public.
Okay. We have, so any other questions for Roxanne? Okay. Okay. Neil.
Good evening again. Neil Brower, Jeffrey Mangels, Butler and Mitchell, representing WS Communities. This ordinance as it stands here today sort of represents a kind of unholy trifecta of bad law, discrimination, and bad policy. And certainly we disagree with the city attorney's read of the Health and Safety Code in AB 352 because we understand the tendency to want to read the city's discretion as broadly as possible. But in this case, state law is actually very specific as to the kinds of restrictions that the city can place upon efficiency dwelling units, or here SROs, if it chooses to do so. And affordability is not among those. This is also discriminatory because one of the original animating factors behind the original IZO passed on March 26th was this idea that somehow units that tailored to certain kinds of households were undesirable. And let's review just where we were, because that ordinance was born out of a desire to limit the units. In the downtown area, roughly 2,100 units, housing units at that time, were proposed or pending. Only 300 of those, or roughly 15 to 16%, were SROs. And that was sort of that's the genesis of this entire effort. And in limiting SROs only to 100% affordable units, the city is essentially making a kind of statement that although we believe this housing type to be sort of substandard and incompatible with community building and sort of neighbor relations, we'll allow it for people that don't have the means to obtain other kinds of units, but we won't allow them for market rate. It's bad policy because as we were here, there was a very rich discussion the last time we were here describing the kinds of different policies, taking seriously this idea of different living arrangements in an emerging market for these kinds of units, and for using the 3rd Street Promenade as the city's living room and sort of taking that concept seriously in terms of how you implement housing. But all of that's out the window because irrespective of any intent for this to be potentially short-term, nobody knows how long it'll take for that policy to first be developed and second work its way through the system toward adoption. As Commissioner Lambert said earlier, this is a permanent ordinance and you have to treat it as such. Thank you very much. Yes.
So I just want to clarify my understanding of your position. Mm-hmm. When I read the AB 352 language, and I'm not going to comment on your disagreement with the city attorney regarding what can and can't be regulated, but the legislative analysis for AB 352 explicitly states that cities are not required to permit this type of housing. Your letter suggests something else. So I just want to, for the sake of clarity, understand whether it is your position that the city is obligated to permit this type of housing or not.
Not necessarily, but under this ordinance it would. And
I understand what
yeah.
you're right. I understand what you're saying. I just want to,
Yeah.
and as far as and I'm looking at the proposed zoning code. I just want to understand. Would it be your position? I presume that the limitations on things like, say, length of tenancy would not. The city would be free to make such judgment as to initial lease terms or things like that. It's not a limit on the number.
Right. No, I think possibly. But again, in this case, 17958.1C lays explicit criteria that as far as the limitations that you can place on the units. I'm not sure that tenancy restrictions fall among those. I can't. I'd have to look at that a little bit further. But at first blush, I would say it's not permitted by Subdivision C.
Specifically for this unit type, even if cities are permitted to regulate tenancy generally?
Specifically for this unit type.
Thank you.
But I mean, clearly we regulate tenancy. Well, we don't regulate tenancy for affordable housing SROs. So the question is whether we could regulate tenancy for market rate. We can't regulate for affordable because it's transitional housing and supportive housing, and people do move out depending on when they're ready to go.
That's a different type.
I know, but
Yeah.
the question is, can we put different standards on market rate? I don't know the answer to that. I have a question about the projects that the developer you represent. Do they meet the development standards that we adopted in April? Those projects with the open space,
The
community
new
space?
development standards, I don't believe
We went
they
through
do
a
now.
whole long discussion. It's what the council adopted on April 23rd. It's basically the development standards for
Correct.
an SRO project. Do your projects meet those standards?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Neil? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so public testimony is closed. Amy, did you want to talk? What's that?
I guess my thought is that it sounds like council is very interested in putting a restriction on the development of market rate SRO units. It also feels like the intent is to try and develop a more thorough and thoughtful policy around new housing types, and to do that in the short term. So I guess one idea I would propose to the commission for us to think about is recommending to council that this, I think as Commissioner Lambert was talking about, that this be an emergency ordinance. I too am uncomfortable with this idea that this is being proposed as a permanent ordinance. It sounds like that's not really the intent, and if that's not really the intent, well, let's be clear about that by saying this is an emergency ordinance and recommending that that the time limit on the emergency ordinance be shorter if we can, that the time limit on the emergency ordinance be much shorter than 5 years, that it be a year or 6 months or 9 months, something reasonable.
So if I just might jump in, because I think I answered Commissioner Lambert's question a little bit incorrectly earlier, and I apologize. So because this would be prohibiting a use, we could not do it under the city's IZOs. So we could not use an emergency IZO. It would be, so that's part of the reason why we are here is that procedurally, it would not be possible to use an emergency IZO to effectuate this change.
Good answer.
Because of the state legislation?
Well, because it would be prohibiting a use, so you have to use state law rules for that. And so that was the initial 45 days, which did not get extended by council. There are specific findings that you would need to make to extend that, and those weren't presented to council within that time.
Well, how do we create some assurance then that this is going to get, right, like that this is short term?
That could be a recommendation of this commission. Some timeframes could be established in a permanent form in the text of the ordinance.
You could sunset it at some point, maybe.
Yes.
I have a question and then some comments. This is for the city attorney, and I assume that you think this is legal because we did it in April. Whether you can have different development standards for market rate SROs versus affordable SROs.
Yes.
That was simple. Thank you. Okay, let me tell you what I think. If you haven't already picked up on where I'm coming from here, I'm opposed to this, whether it's a short-term, mid-term, or long-term answer to our problem, because I think we're reacting to a situation. This is a very reactive thing we're doing, and I think this is an important enough housing policy that we should spend some time thinking about it, which we did in April. The staff report this time, the staff report last time went through a wonderful explanation right on the mark of how market trends are changing and populations are changing. And the downtown plan calls for a diversity of households. That doesn't mean all families with 2 kids. It means a diversity of households. It means millennials, whether they be single or couples or whatever, have an opportunity to live downtown. And most of them probably could not afford 1 and 2 bedrooms in the new projects. This offers an option for them. And that's why we came up with the development standards we came up with in April to make this a more communal kind of living situation, because we were worried about the community connectiveness, which kind of is funny given that we just talked about a 10-foot hedge for people who are invested in the community because they own property. But downtown, clearly, you have outdoor space, you have a lot of community involvement on the promenade, what have you, and also having some community space in your building gives you that connectedness to the other tenants in the building. That's very important, and it's why we did that in April. So I think that we talk about market trends, and I guess we're going to look at all these different options, but in the meantime, we've closed this option with this action. So individual people who maybe were born and raised in Santa Monica really do not now have an option for living in Santa Monica. This would provide them that because it's much more affordable than the 1, 2s, and 3s that we're seeing. After my head finished exploding reading this, I just there is absolutely no way I can support this, and I'd be willing to go to council and tell them why. I think it's a terrible housing policy. It really eliminates a whole population in the housing market from affordable housing opportunities in Santa Monica, even though they're market rate. And I think that's a really bad policy, and I don't think it's compliant with the loose. So that's me.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, I have more questions, actually. So I've reiterated this before, and I'll say it here again. And I just took a look at the health and safety code, though I'm not a lawyer. I am much more interested in ensuring longer-term tenancies than I am in regulating the existence of SRO housing for the reasons that Commissioner Lambert already stated, and I'm not going to reiterate those. I do think that we're getting to a place where there are qualitative differences between rental housing types. And if we look at the housing crisis in California, we do need to be considering the range of rental housing that's available to folks. And to lose this type would be of great concern to me, even if a 100% affordable housing project was one that met the need, because I think there are clearly in the ether folks who are experimenting with market rate housing types that are substantially cheaper than what we currently see on the market, and I think that's really important to recognize. So I would like to see long-term tenancies here. I'd like to see the language. I'm less. I'll just say it. The monthly rental basis or longer. I'd like to see initial lease terms of a year in these. I don't particularly want to distinguish between market rate and affordable. But perhaps we have to for the sake of I think the issue, though, is that the kind of housing you're describing, supportive housing and transitional housing and shelter housing, is not this kind of housing. The zoning code distinguishes between them.
Is Step Up, in fact, I know somebody
Okay.
who was in a Step Up facility for like 8 months and progressed so well. that
Right,
he's
but
now
I
in the
don't
26th
think
Street
that. But I
project.
don't think that is the step up. The place where that person lived for 8 months. I'm not sure it qualifies as SRO housing. It's not. I believe it's approved under supportive housing, which is a different section
Well,
of the
it's
zoning.
100% affordable
code.
SRO.
Is it? I think it's a. We were told that this was a different section of the zoning code, that we treat them as qualitatively different housing projects. No. So we could regulate tenancy length for SROs without affecting shelters, residential facilities, supportive housing, or
I would just
transitional
leave
housing.
affordable housing out of the mix altogether. If you want market rate tenancies, I
Fine.
would go
Okay.
along with that.
All right, that's fine. But okay, so that's my position. My question, though, is before we vote, is there any council policy that council has made in the last few months of which we need to be aware as a commission that, both advises council but also is subject to established city policy? I want to be careful that we are nothing new. Okay. All right.
Jason?
Can I apologize, Commissioner Perry. Commissioner Landis,
Yeah.
I actually don't understand what you just said. So are you supportive of this, or are you not supportive of this? Are you supportive of this? And what is long-term? I don't understand the long-term tenancy.
So
where that fits in, and I apologize.
what I'm struggling with is I am not supportive of a ban, right? I think the simplest thing to have done would have been to say, I mean, if we're following this logic, the simplest thing to have done for the city to have done would have been to say, AB 352 says we don't have to have this kind of housing, so let's not. That would have been simple. It would have been wrong, but it would have been simple and clear. I don't want to go there. There is a debate as to whether or not the distinction between market rate SROs and everything else is a distinction that is tenable under state law. The city attorney says it is. We've heard public comment that it's not. I'm saying I'm not even taking a position on that because I don't want to get rid of market rate SROs. What I do want to do is put a 1-year minimum lease term on market rate SROs. That's what I want to do. That would be my recommendation to council.
So you're not supportive
Of this as written? I can't. No, not on the policy basis. I'm not supportive of eliminating market rate SROs in a permanent ban.
And what you maybe are supportive of is amending that last ordinance that went to them to include a minimum year lease.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Jason?
Yeah, question for staff. Procedurally, if the Planning Commission tonight wanted to pursue some action other than approval of the language that's proposed in the resolution, what would that mean in terms of the timing of City Council considering the matter?
We believe that we will be taking the red line forward on May 14th. We will certainly summarize the alternatives that this commission would want staff exploring in lieu of what's before you. In other words, we don't believe that that if you ask staff to explore different regulations, we would still be bringing forward the red line as responsive to council's discussion on April 23rd.
Can I ask a question?
Is that,
Go ahead.
if I could just follow this.
Okay.
So you would be going to City Council with no recommendation from the Planning Commission or a recommendation to not adopt?
Yeah, the latter's certainly possible.
Okay. And that does not require an appeal maneuver? That,
No.
So a text, so are you saying that a proposed text amendment can go to City Council without the Planning Commission
Support? That's correct, yeah.
It's happened before. Yeah. I have a suggestion.
But it's only so the Planning Commission is required to have the opportunity to consider it. Is that the idea?
And have the opportunity to make a recommendation without specifying what that recommendation is.
Okay. Commissioner Lambert?
I would suggest that rather than just sort of being no, that we stand by what we did in April and use the development standards that we came up with, which was time consuming and based on, all the needs for community and interaction, all that kind of stuff in an SRO building, that we stand by those and then we add the 12-month tenancy to them. And that would be my recommendation.
If it's a motion, I'd second it with the proviso that it's a 12-month tenancy to natural persons. To natural persons. Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion. It's been seconded. We're in discussion now.
I have a question about your motion.
Did I make the motion?
You did.
Too much Game of Thrones today.
So basically, your motion would say that there's not a distinction between affordable SROs and market rate SROs, so they continue to be allowable in the city according to how they exist on the use chart, and that the standards for them would be the ones that we passed last.
Well, the standards that we passed last time were for market rate SROs, I believe, weren't they?
So
Yeah.
then market rate SROs are a different type, and then we would have to add them to the use charts too. Or,
Well, they have different development standards. They're the same use type. Still SRO housing.
okay, see, the way they were doing it, they were defining it as a different type. So we would have to undo that. Is that right?
We didn't do that in April.
I don't think we distinguished between market rate and affordable in our April discussion.
Do you remember, Amy?
I think we said SROs
So
are
that's
SROs.
only what's coming before us now. So if we just leave standards that I know, but they're
What is the-
talking.
we did-
Yeah.
They're-
We don't really need you guys. It's
Yeah.
The standards for the affordable are already in the code.
Right, my question was, the standards that are, the way the code set is, before all this happened, there was one kind of SRO and one set of standards for them, and they were either of one of these affordable or special types or not, but they were all allowed in the same places, and they all had to meet the same standards. That's how it was before. So what you're suggesting is returning to that, but with new standards that would apply to all the different
No,
rates.
I suggest that
I
we
don't know.
retain the standards that are in 9.31.330, which apply to affordable and elderly and emergency and all that stuff. Leave them as they are in the code, but we have a separate set of development standards for market rate SRO.
But in the way it was before, those standards didn't apply only to market rate and the special uses. Before. They didn't
Okay.
differentiate.
They didn't
So you
differentiate,
can't
no.
just do that. What you're you have to be.
Right, and the motion that I understood that I was seconding was that we were, was that, because there was a motion there that I thought she was making, but maybe I'm misunderstanding it. But I understood Commissioner Lambert's motion to be saying the commission respectfully and politely declines to take up the resolution that is before us.
Right.
And instead recommends to council that it build a permanent ordinance on the basis of the development standards that we recommended in April and add a minimum 1-year tenancy to natural persons to the lease terms.
Right, I
that was the
understand.
motion that I believed
I
was
know,
seconding
and
without
what-
any
Let's ask
comment
staff.
about
But
the
there's a
discussion.
hole in it.
Let's
and
ask
that's-
staff about that. So
So-
I would suggest that we retain the
Wait.
standards.
Let
Let
Roxanne
them, don't
finish.
say it again. Let
I think
them-
another way to get at what Sean's motion is that this commission would recommend that council not adopt the red line that you're looking at, rather extend the emergency IZ 2609 addressing common area and other development standards for market rate SROs with this additional, with a recommendation for an additional
That sounds-
specification.
That sounds like the motion.
I thought that's what I did.
Related to 1-year tenancy and natural persons only.
Right, right.
That aspect we would need. It's fine to recommend that. I will tell you that from the staff's perspective, we would need to look very carefully at that clause, this particular add-on. We would look at that carefully.
But
you're free to recommend that.
Totally get it, and I totally get that as you look at it, you may refine it into something that you believe is defensible, but I think it's consistent with what we've been exploring relative to all housing types and the need for permanent residence and domicile in Santa Monica.
So we can have standards for a market rate SRO without having a definition of what a market rate SRO is. That's what I'm.
It's everything that is not this.
I know, but see, the thing that we passed was floating, and it remains floating.
So the ordinance from April 23rd creates the definition. We understand that you have to define the use, and that's good practice. And the April 23rd ordinance that council adopted establishes that.
Okay.
I have a question. Do you have what we passed last time in accessible to you?
I do.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
You could pause and make copies. It's
Yeah, okay.
accessible.
Let me just take a look at this.
So it only, I'm sorry.
Do we want to revisit this?
Can I just ask this question one more time? The only way that it actually defines this new use is because the title of it is single room occupancy structure market rate.
Yeah.
That, in essence, defines it. That's it. That's good enough
Well,
so that it's
Nina,
actually doing. I just want to make sure.
It's everything that isn't this.
So there's
That
two
doesn't
kinds of
exist.
regulations happening, I think. So what before you would be a use regulation, that's what's before you tonight in these red lines, but actually what was before you on April 23rd was more of a development standards regulation, which is, so they would all be still classified. If you went to, nothing happened on the April 23rd ordinance to touch the use classification definitions.
Okay.
It simply said, if you have an SRO structure, which lives under that 931330, that is the affordable on all these specialized housing types, then those would still be those development standards. And then it added an additional section that said if you're not one of those, then these are your
it's
development
defined.
standards.
Okay.
So that's what the IZO did.
So we want to retain that
Or does.
paragraph.
Oh, now I see it here. Okay, never mind. I didn't look at all. I just was stuck right here with this. Sorry.
But the addition adds that definition. The thing tonight.
Sorry, I'm just going to double check because I'm going to follow up on your point about natural persons. Do we define tenancy in the code? Does tenancy refer to the occupant, or does it refer to the lease agreement?
Let us double check. I'm not
Okay.
recalling that, but let's check.
Unless-
I don't think we do.
Chair, may I
Yeah.
speak?
You do?
Well, let me think about it. Okay, any other comments? Amy, you're
Yeah,
up.
we're just Amy's.
Yes, so Roxanne, I apologize that I'm having a tough time keeping track here of all these ordinances flying about. So the ordinance that we last recommended to council and was adopted by council was an emergency ordinance.
That's correct, yes.
And that's not in conflict because it's not a prohibition.
Correct.
Okay. I guess I would just ask the commission to consider whether we should be recommending that emergency ordinance get extended for a certain amount of time that's less than 5 years.
Sure.
So again, we can to align it, I think, with what seems to
always
be
extend
the
it
intent.
again,
Right.
So how about 1 year?
Sure, that's right.
Okay, so.
I made the motion. Did you make the motion?
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded, it's been amended, and it basically says that it has a 1-year shelf life. Is that your? Yeah, okay.
Recommendation.
And it includes a 1-year tenancy as if it's legal, if the 1-year tenancy is legal.
That's great.
What was did you have an answer about tenancy?
I don't see that defined in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So then I'd like to keep the request for the sake of the policy principle that we're talking about 1-year tenancy by natural persons. I understand you're going to have to refine that, but
Okay.
yeah.
So it seems that what we're really talking about, let me try to put this in perspective. You have a situation where the market has changed and we have demand for cheaper housing. It's not clear to me exactly how much cheaper this housing will be, because without kitchens, you're basically forced to eat in restaurants or buy stuff.
This was.
But hear me out. Hear me out. Okay. Right. Okay. So the point I'm making is that this is a very different lifestyle. It's a very urban lifestyle and may require more money than you would think. You may be better off in a 375 square foot efficiency cost-wise than you will be in a smaller building. At the other extreme, you have basically rooms that are basically smaller than your typical hotel room. And when they get that small, and unless there's a one-year tenancy, we should be collecting transit occupancy taxes on them because, they're that kind of room, And there's no guarantee with these very weak standards that these buildings will have the kind of amenities that would make people love to stick around. They may just, these are pretty modest amenities, the square feet we're asking for. I think 10 square feet of common area is very modest. Per unit is very modest. And it maybe needs some more definition. So, but on one hand, we have a good starting point for these SROs, which we've recommended to City Council. And City Council is saying, wait, we don't want to deal with that for another year or 9 months while we figure it all out. So that's really what it's coming down to. Deal with it today in, let's say, as perfect a form as we've gotten it in the last month or so, or hold off, freeze everything, and wait till. So it's almost a case of the excellent being the enemy of the good. So that's really where we're at. Is that an accurate expression of what we're facing? Well, in other words, we cooked those numbers up, and we didn't really road test them. We didn't say, let's try some typical buildings, see what they would look like. So they're good, but they're not tuned, okay? And we know that. And we could get a better product in a year or 9 months or 6 months because it would include all their expressions of that. But we're saying we feel confident that this is good enough to get a driver's license, a learner's permit for this particular concept. So that's where we are. Okay. So are we comfortable with that as a group? Oh.
Well, I'll just state that I feel like there are many different paths that we can take at this point that ultimately need to end up in some lasting housing policy changes. And how we get there, I feel like I can be flexible with it in that I think that the public would be well served by any of those options, as long as on down the line we're looking at opportunities to expand the range of housing choices. So whether it's saying no SRO units right now, or whether it's putting in the development standards that we recommended earlier, either approach is fine. I have concerns about the 12-month tenancy requirement, particularly with this kind of unit, because again, thinking of this in terms of having range of housing options, there's a need for medium-term housing in our community. And we want to have something that will fit that need. And I would think that SROs maybe have greater potential to address pressing needs in our community on that score than other housing types. So, I recognize that this would be a temporary provision, but I would fear that it would, by default, get carried over. And so for that reason, I'm going to vote against the motion solely because of the 12-month requirement.
Can I ask you a question regarding that? If someone said to you 1 month versus 12, would you accept 6? Or are you just conceptually against the time limit?
Well, 1 month would be fine, and I think I think that's already captured in city law.
So you're staying firm on that. Okay, Leslie.
I just, I'm going with Commissioner Landers' thing on tenancy because I know how important it is to him. But there's a part of me that thinks if there's any place for corporate housing, this is it, because it takes the pressure off the rental housing market that we're seeing all kinds of abuses going on with corporate housing. Maybe, and this would be absolutely impossible to enforce, but if like a percentage of the units in a building could be 6-month leases or 3-month leases or whatever the heck, I don't know, if it's 25%. What do you think, Sean?
So, bearing in mind that this is a recommendation to council and that we're going to be dealing with the multiple housing unit types on May 22nd, is that right? I would prefer the clean recommendation for the 12-month tenancy to natural persons in this now, because the point has been made by, I think, a number of, we've heard that this is an issue across our community. I think we need a much more nuanced conversation about medium-term rentals. And I think however that plays out, we're going to be looking at broader changes to ordinances. For now, the way I am balancing the SRO issues with our housing needs are precisely that I believe that the SROs need to serve permanent housing uses. And at the moment, because we do not have domicile or permanent residence defined in our code, but we do have existing precedent in our code for a minimum lease term, that's where I want to land. But if we're going to have a longer conversation about how we use definitions and policies to achieve the permanent residence outcomes, then yeah, I think things can be reopened. Look, I was thinking about this. We did the STOA tonight. 1707 Cloverfield. If you're talking about places that could serve corporate housing or medium-term rental, that is precisely the kind of area. It is not in a neighborhood. It is directly across the street from the water gardens. That's where we could talk about percentages, but I'd like to know what we get for it, and that's a much longer conversation. It's not limited to SROs. But for this, if we can stay where we are, I'd be grateful.
Okay.
Well, hopefully there are 4 votes for something.
I hope so.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. It's been amended. Are we ready for any other discussion or ready to call the question?
Let's call the question.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lambert?
Yes.
Commissioner Landers?
Yes.
Commissioner Perry?
No.
Chair Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Do we want someone to go to the city council and present this, or would that be a kamikaze mission? I can handle that. I watch Game of Thrones. I'm ready.
I propose you.
So that's not on your agenda. So if any,
Okay. All right.
to actually appoint a representative, so you may show up as individuals if you'd like.
Can't our chair always represent our commission?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Without a
Thank
vote?
you.
Without a
There you
vote.
go, Mario.
But only the chair? How about the vice chair?
It will be May 14th.
May 14th.
But the chair can appoint someone. The chair can appoint. You can appoint someone.
Thank you.
Wait, what's next?
That's it for.
So I'd like, just for the record, don't we have a future agenda items?
We do.
Okay, so I'm just going to if I may, restate the request for the budget letter. I believe there's a plan, but just for the record, putting it on there. And I would like to formally request that a future commission agenda include the issue of parking permits and unbundled parking.
I think that's already in one of our buckets, isn't it?
Well, if it's not, it should be. So
Yeah, okay.
consider it requested.
On those long forgotten buckets.
It may have become unbundled at some point or unbucketed.
And maybe staff could share last year's budget letter, just as by way of a reminder? Oh, it was?
And
Because it was
bud-
so last minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, the budget framework, everything's.
So, and also, I have a point of information. You know, we had a request here for the preventing permit parking for unbundled parking buildings. And there was some feeling that we didn't have the right to do that for some reason. But I think there's some important value to that. How do we introduce it, in which bucket? How does it actually get formalized or shot down permanently, one way or the other? We should either push on it or we should lay it to rest.
Sorry, I want to, we skipped planning commissioner announcements. Before we go, two quick things. One is last Sunday, and I was sorry that more of us weren't there, was the 10th anniversary celebration for the Annenberg Community Beach House. Representatives of the Annenberg Foundation were there. There were only 2 commissioners present. I was one of them. And it was a lovely event, and really a celebration of what was accomplished with that beach house. And I know how hard planning staff worked, among others, to help make that happen, both the beach house itself and Sunday's event. So I want to say thank you and hope that we will be invited to future celebrations. Next Thursday evening, May 9th, Senator Scott Wiener, Assemblymember Richard Bloom, and our Mayor Gleam Davis will be on a panel on gentrification as part of the Santa Monica College Public Policy Institute Spring Symposium. So if anyone is interested in those, one wonders whether SB 50 will be discussed on the panel or, among outside the room. Exactly. But if folks are interested, the reception is at 5:30 and the event starts at 6:30, and it is at I want to say it's at the Broad. Yeah, at the Broad. So that would be of interest to folks. Yep.
Okay, motion to adjourn? Okay. I second it.
We're good.